Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're zeroing in on a really common frustration for English learners.
hmm
That moment when you realize you understand quite a bit, right? You can read articles, watch movies, maybe follow podcasts.
Yeah, you get the input.
Exactly. But actually speaking
Right.
feels like a completely different ballgame.
It really does. A huge hurdle.
So we've been digging into some great material from the Daily English podcast with host Paul. And our goal here is to, pull out the most effective strategies, the best mindset shifts to help you finally speak English with, well, real confidence.
It's such a familiar scenario, isn't it? You're absorbing all this English content pretty effectively sometimes.
Right.
But when it comes to actually producing the language yourself, there's this invisible wall.
Yeah. Invisible wall. Like the connection just isn't quite there.
hmm
And, to really get a handle on this disconnect, I think a good analogy is learning a musical instrument, like the piano.
Okay.
You can listen to amazing piano music, totally understand the melody, the harmony,
Sure, you appreciate it.
but that doesn't magically mean your hands know how to, move across the keys.
That's a spot-on comparison. Absolutely. Passive understanding, whether it's music or English, is about receiving, processing information.
Right.
Speaking, though, that's a truly active skill. It really demands that we develop what you might call our language muscles.
Language muscles. I like that.
Mm.
Okay, so it's about actively developing those muscles.
Yeah.
Now, one of the first hurdles a lot of learners face, and it came up in the daily English stuff, is what we can call the translation trap.
Ah, yes, the translation trap.
This is when you're thinking in your native language and then trying to translate it sort of word for word into English before you speak. What kind of roadblocks does that put up?
Oh, it creates a real bottleneck, a major one, in a flow of conversation, I mean.
How so?
Well, imagine trying to have a spontaneous chat while you're constantly doing these mental gymnastics.
Right.
Switching back and forth between languages. It just inevitably slows you down significantly.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a race with lead weights tied to your ankles.
Yeah.
And as Paul discussed, it can also make your spoken English sound a bit unnatural.
Exactly. Unnatural, hesitant, sometimes almost robotic.
So, okay, how do we actually break free from this translation habit? Because it feels pretty ingrained for a lot of people.
It does. And the fundamental shift is to, well, cultivate the practice of thinking directly in English.
Thinking directly in English.
Now, that sounds maybe simpler than it is. It requires a really focused, consistent effort to kind of rewire your mental processes.
Rewire. Okay, so instead of seeing English words as just like replacements for words in my own language,
Mm-hmm.
I should aim to actually form the thought itself in English right from the start.
Precisely. That's the goal. It's a fundamental change in how you engage with the language. Instead of English being this sort of code that needs deciphering and then re-encoding,
Yeah.
it gradually becomes the natural medium for your thoughts to actually take shape.
Okay, this sounds like a real turning point, potentially. But how do we do that? It's not like flipping a mental switch.
Definitely not.
What are some tangible ways to actually start thinking in English?
It's definitely a gradual evolution, yeah. But the Daily English podcast offered some really practical starting points. And one of the most powerful is simply to intentionally immerse yourself in English as much as possible.
Immerse yourself, even if you're not living in an English-speaking country.
Absolutely. Even then.
Okay, immersion.
Yeah.
So consciously surrounding myself with English all day, music, movies, TV shows, books,
Yeah.
even like changing the language settings on my phone.
Exactly. All of those things. It's about constantly exposing your brain to the rhythms, the sounds, the patterns of English.
Okay.
Think of it as training your brain, your auditory system, to just naturally start processing and maybe even generating thoughts in English patterns.
Okay.
The more you do this, the less your brain will automatically default back to your native language when it's forming ideas.
That makes a lot of sense. So the more I'm surrounded by it, the less I'll need to consciously translate.
Right.
And those English phrases might just start popping into my head more spontaneously.
Precisely. It's like you're building this mental library of English
Mhm.
that's just readily accessible when you need to express yourself. And as Paul emphasized, consistency is absolutely key here.
Right, consistency.
Even small, regular doses of immersion, they can make a really significant difference over time.
Absolutely. Consistency is definitely the name of the game.
Okay.
Okay, so besides this thinking in English idea, what are some other common mental hurdles? Things that stop learners from speaking?
Well, a major one, and it's something the Daily English podcast really highlighted, is the very real fear of making mistakes.
Ah, Yes, the fear.
This single fear can be so powerful, honestly, that it prevents many learners from even opening their mouths to speak in the first place.
Oh, that fear of sounding silly or not getting the grammar perfect or just saying the wrong thing entirely. I think every learner can relate to
Yeah.
that gut feeling.
Absolutely. We've all been there.
So how can we help listeners start to, you know, overcome this fear or at least manage it?
Well, the first crucial step is to actively reframe how we think about mistakes.
Reframe mistakes. Okay.
As Paul pointed out, everyone makes mistakes when learning something new. Everyone. Even native speakers slip up occasionally.
That's true. Yeah.
It's an absolutely inherent part of the learning journey. It's unavoidable.
That's a really helpful reminder
hmm
because I think when you're sort of in the thick of learning, it's easy to feel like you're the only one stumbling over words.
Exactly. You feel spotlighted. So instead of viewing mistakes as like evidence of failure,
Mm.
we need to start seeing them as incredibly valuable opportunities,
Hmm.
opportunities for learning and growth.
Opportunities. How so?
Well, each mistake you make is actually a chance to refine your pronunciation, maybe correct a grammatical error you keep making, or even expand your vocabulary in a way that really sticks because you learned it from, well, a mistake.
So it's almost like those funny failed compilation videos online
Uh,
where people kind of laugh at their mishaps. But in a way, everyone watching learns what not to do. It's about not taking ourselves quite so seriously during the process.
Precisely. Take yourself less seriously. Embrace the mistakes. Try to understand why you made them. Extract the lesson, and then
Hmm.
keep moving forward. Don't let that fear of imperfection keep you silent.
Okay, I like that. Embrace the stumble.
Oh,
All right. And the Daily English podcast went on to discuss some specific techniques for actively building that speaking fluency. Let's dive into those.
okay.
The first one mentioned was shadowing. What exactly does that involve?
Right, shadowing. It's a technique where you listen to a native English speaker, maybe from a podcast, a movie clip, a lecture, whatever,
Okay.
and you try to repeat what they're saying almost at the exact same time. Like you're literally acting like a shadow following their voice.
A shadow, a vocal workout, as Paul described it. So I could just put on some English audio and try to speak along with the person talking, mimicking them as closely as possible.
Exactly that. You're actively mimicking their pronunciation, their intonation, the rise and fall of their voice,
Hmm.
and even the rhythm and the pacing of how they speak. It's a fantastic way to get more comfortable with the natural flow of spoken English.
And pick up new words and phrases, too, presumably.
Oh, absolutely, in a very natural context.
That sounds like a really practical exercise. It's like having a built-in speaking model right there to follow, even if it's just a recording.
Mm.
Are there any tips to make shadowing more effective?
Yes, definitely. The Daily English podcast suggested starting small. Use short segments of audio or video, maybe just a minute or two to begin with.
Okay, don't try to shadow a whole movie right away.
Exactly. As you get more comfortable with the technique, then you can gradually increase the length of the material you're shadowing. Build up your stamina.
Start small,
Yeah.
build up makes sense. What else should we keep in mind?
Another crucial tip is to really, really pay attention to the subtle details of the speaker's
The
voice.
details.
Like, notice exactly how they pronounce specific sounds. Where do they place the emphasis, the stress within a word or a sentence? How does their intonation change to convey meaning or emotion? It's not just about repeating the words themselves. It's much more about imitating the how of their speech, the musicality.
So capturing those little nuances that make spoken English sound fluid and, well, natural. The shadowing technique sounds really powerful. I'm definitely going to encourage listeners to give that a try. What's another technique that was highlighted?
Another really fundamental aspect of building confidence in speaking is to really master those everyday common English phrases.
Everyday phrases.
Yeah, the basics. They might seem basic, but they truly form the foundation of almost any conversation you'll have.
You mean things like, hello, how are you, thank you, maybe ordering coffee. Those really core expressions we use all the time.
Exactly those. Having a solid, almost effortless command of these frequently used phrases just makes you feel much more secure, more at ease when you're speaking English. It's like having these essential tools in your language toolkit that you can just reach for without having to think too hard about them.
That makes perfect sense. If I don't have to mentally struggle with those very basic interactions, it frees up my mental energy to focus on the actual content of the conversation.
Precisely.
So the key action here is just practice. Practice saying these common phrases out loud in different contexts until they just become automatic.
Exactly. It's about truly owning these phrases, as Paul put it, making them an active part of your spoken vocabulary so you can use them without any hesitation at all.
Got it. Focus on those everyday building blocks. Practice them until they feel completely natural. Okay. What's another effective technique that came up?
Another one, which sounds simple but is incredibly effective, is to regularly record yourself speaking English.
Record myself, like
Yeah.
just talking into my phone. I sometimes do that for quick voice notes, but I haven't really thought about it for English practice specifically.
Try doing it specifically for your English learning.
Yeah.
Maybe choose a topic you're interested in, talk about your day, or even just read a short passage aloud.
Okay.
And then, and this is the sometimes challenging part, take the step of listening back to the recording.
Listening back. Yeah, that can feel a bit cringy sometimes.
It can, but it offers a completely different perspective on your own spoken English. It's
Yeah.
invaluable, really.
That's a great point. It's like getting an objective viewpoint on something you normally only experience subjectively from the inside out. What should I be listening for when I review these recordings?
Okay, first, really focus on your pronunciation. Are you articulating the words clearly, correctly? If you identify certain sounds or words that you're consistently struggling with, you can then target those for more focused practice. Practice them in isolation, maybe.
Okay, so pinpoint those tricky sounds and
Yeah.
really drill down on them. What else?
Next, pay attention to your fluency, your flow. Are you speaking smoothly, or are there noticeable pauses, hesitations? Are you searching for words?
Yeah, those awkward gaps.
Exactly. If you find yourself stumbling in certain places, those are likely the phrases or sentence structures that you need to practice more. Practice until they flow more naturally.
So it's about identifying those sticky points in my speech and then actively working to smooth them out with targeted practice, like sanding down the rough edges.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. And don't be afraid to experiment a little bit when you record.
Experiment how?
Try using different intonations, maybe speak a bit faster or slower. See what feels comfortable and sounds natural for you. This process not only builds confidence, but also helps you develop your expressiveness in English.
This is all incredibly helpful. Some really concrete steps people can start taking right away. Now, the Daily English podcast also touched on the brain science behind learning to speak a new language. What's the key insight there?
Yeah, the core point is that learning a new language, and especially the active process of speaking it, actually rewires your brain on a neurological level.
Wow, rewires the brain.
Yeah, it strengthens existing neural connections and it forges entirely new pathways, specifically for the vocabulary, the grammar, the pronunciation of that new language.
Fascinating. And the discussion mentioned Broca's area specifically. What's the significance of that particular part of the brain?
Right, Broca's area. It's a specific region in your brain that is absolutely crucial for the production of speech.
Speech production, okay.
And the key takeaway here is that simply understanding a language, passively absorbing it, doesn't automatically train Broca's area for the very specific motor skills and cognitive processes involved in physically speaking that language. They're different processes.
Okay, so understanding is one thing, the input, right?
Right.
But physically producing the sounds, stringing them together into sentences, the output that requires a different kind of brain engagement, a different kind of training.
Precisely. Paul used a great analogy, actually. He said, having all the individual ingredients to bake a cake doesn't automatically mean, the recipe or have the hands-on practice to actually bake it successfully.
I like that.
Speaking requires that specific recipe for language production and the actual practice to transform your understanding into spoken words.
That really clarifies the distinction. Love that analogy. Okay, so we've talked about the mechanics, the brain stuff, but the Daily English podcast also really emphasized the importance of overcoming mental barriers.
Huge topic.
What are some of the main mental obstacles that tend to hold learners back from speaking more confidently?
Well, one of the biggest, as we touched on earlier, is that pervasive fear of judgment.
Right. The fear again.
Yeah. It includes the fear of making grammatical errors, sounding awkward or silly, or simply not being understood. These anxieties can create a really significant mental block.
Definitely. It's like there's this little internal critic just constantly scrutinizing every word before it even leaves your mouth.
That's a perfect description. And often these fears are actually amplified internally. We tend to be much, much more critical of our own efforts than other people would likely ever be.
That's so true. We get caught up in overanalyzing and just end up psyching ourselves out.
Yeah.
So what's the key then? How do we dismantle these internal critics and move past that fear of judgment?
The core strategy is to consciously work on shifting your perspective. Really make a deliberate effort to be kinder, more patient with yourself.
Be kinder. Okay.
And again, to view mistakes as an absolutely essential, valuable part of the learning process, not as personal failures.
So it's about giving ourselves permission to not be perfect
Right.
right away and
Yeah.
to see those stumbles as just part of the natural learning curve.
Exactly. Think back to that analogy of a toddler learning to walk.
Okay.
They fall down countless times, right? But
Yeah.
they don't get discouraged and give up. They just get back up and keep trying. We need to approach language learning with that same kind of resilience, that same self-compassion.
I love that. Approach it with the tenacity of a toddler. That's
Ah.
great. And the Daily English podcast also mentioned the importance of acknowledging, celebrating those small victories.
Nice. Crucial.
When we do push ourselves beyond our comfort zones and try to speak, even if it's not perfect.
Absolutely. Recognizing and celebrating every new word you learn, every sentence you successfully construct, every interaction you manage, no matter how small it might seem, that's crucial for fueling your motivation.
Oh, yeah.
And it gradually chips away at those mental barriers, building confidence piece by piece.
Okay, so be kind to myself, embrace the wobbles like a toddler, and celebrate the little wins. Makes sense. Now, let's move on to some specific techniques for achieving that more natural, fluid quality in spoken English. The first one that came up on Daily English was chunking. What's that all about?
Chunking. Yeah, it's a really useful technique. Basically, you intentionally break down longer sentences or phrases into smaller, more manageable segments, or chunks.
Chunks. Okay. Can you give me a quick example of how that might work in practice?
Certainly. So instead of trying to say the entire sentence, I would like to order a large cup of coffee with milk and sugar, please, all in one big breath.
Yeah, that feels like a mouthful.
Right. You would mentally break it down into smaller parts like, I would like to order, pause, a large cup of coffee, pause with milk and sugar, pause, please.
Ah, I see. So it's like tackling a bigger task by breaking it into a series of smaller, less intimidating steps. How does this approach actually help with speaking fluency?
Well, by focusing on these smaller, sort of self-contained chunks, you significantly reduce the cognitive load on your brain.
Less to think about at once.
Exactly. It feels less overwhelming, and you're much more likely to speak those smaller segments with greater confidence and fluency. These chunks then essentially become building blocks that you can combine later to form more complex sentences more easily.
This sounds like a really practical strategy.
Yeah.
Especially for those moments when you feel a bit overwhelmed or intimidated by longer sentences. Okay, now we talked about shadowing earlier, mainly for pronunciation, but the Daily English podcast also revisited it in the context of developing a more natural flow in speaking. What's the connection there?
Right. So when your goal is more about developing that natural flow, the key with shadowing shifts slightly. You need to focus intently on mimicking the pronunciation, yes. But even more importantly, the rhythm and the intonation patterns of the native speaker.
Rhythm and intonation, the musicality again.
Exactly. Pay very close attention to how they pronounce individual words, sure, but also where they naturally place emphasis or stress within a sentence, how their pitch rises and falls to convey meaning, emotion. It's about trying to embody their entire way of speaking, not just the words.
So really tuning into the music of the language, the stress, the pauses, the pitch changes, not just the lyrics, so to speak.
Perfectly put. And to make shadowing even more effective for developing this natural flow, the Daily English podcast reiterated a few key tips. One is to choose audio or video material that is slightly above your current comfort level.
Slightly above, why?
Challenging enough to push you, to stress you a bit,
Yeah.
but not so difficult that it becomes discouraging or impossible.
Right, something that stretches me but doesn't leave me feeling completely lost at sea.
Got it. Precisely. Another important tip is to continue breaking down the material into smaller, manageable chunks. Don't try to shadow long stretches perfectly right away.
Okay.
You might focus on shadowing just a few sentences perfectly, really nailing the rhythm and intonation before you move on to the next segment.
Quality over quantity in those short bursts.
Exactly. And crucially, as we discussed before, record yourself shadowing. Listen back critically. Identify where your pronunciation or rhythm differs from the original speaker. That self-assessment is key.
That self-assessment loop seems to be a consistently valuable tool throughout this whole process, doesn't it?
Incredibly valuable. Now, the ultimate aim, of course, is to be able to use these speaking skills in real-life conversations.
Right. The real world.
So how do we effectively bridge that gap between practicing these techniques in isolation and actually engaging in meaningful interactions with people?
Yeah, how do we take it live?
Well, the Daily English podcast offered some excellent practical suggestions for actively creating opportunities for meaningful interaction in English without necessarily having to pack your bags and travel.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some concrete ways to make that happen, from home or locally?
One really effective approach is to look at your existing hobbies and interests, things you already love doing.
Okay.
Are there any groups or activities in your local community, maybe online, that are conducted in English? If you enjoy cooking, maybe there's an English language cooking class online or nearby. If you're passionate about film, perhaps there's a film discussion group that uses English.
Connect your passions with practice.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off just practicing English in a vacuum. The focus shifts to doing something you already enjoy, and English just naturally becomes the medium for doing it.
That makes perfect sense. It feels more organic. What other practical options are there?
Well, in today's interconnected world, there are countless online resources.
Hmm.
Language exchange apps and websites are fantastic platforms.
Language exchange. How do those work?
Basically, you connect with other language learners from all over the globe. You can find someone who is actively learning your native language, and you offer to help them practice,
Okay.
while they, in turn, help you practice your English speaking skills. It's reciprocal.
So it's a mutual learning environment. You teach, you learn, and you get real back and forth conversation practice.
Exactly. You get that valuable opportunity to practice speaking, often with native speakers, in exchange for helping them. It's also, frankly, a wonderful way to learn about different cultures and even make new friends.
That sounds like a definite win-win situation.
Yeah,
Are there any other online avenues for finding speaking practice?
absolutely. You can explore online conversation groups specifically for English learners, look for things like virtual language cafes, and you could also consider online tutoring sessions with native English speakers if that fits your budget and goals.
Lots of options out there.
Definitely. The key takeaway here, though, as the Daily English podcast really emphasized, is this. Don't wait. Don't wait until you feel completely fluent to start speaking.
Just jump in.
Just jump in. The sooner you begin to actively engage in conversations, even if they feel challenging or awkward at first, the faster your progress will be. Embrace those early mistakes as learning opportunities and actively seek out chances for an interaction. Don't hide from them.
So the key is really to just start doing it, even if it feels a little daunting initially. Okay. Now, we've covered so many practical techniques and strategies, but the Daily English podcast kept circling back to the fundamental importance of mindset.
Yes, mindset is huge.
Why is having the right mindset so crucial for success in language learning, especially speaking?
Well, your mindset, as Paul rightly pointed out, it really forms the bedrock of your entire language learning journey. It's foundational.
So.
It profoundly influences how you approach challenges, how you interpret your mistakes, and ultimately how you sustain your motivation over the long haul. Cultivating a strong sense of inner belief in your ability to learn and improve is just paramount.
And one of the first steps in shaping that positive mindset, they suggested, is having realistic expectations.
Absolutely critical.
Because becoming fluent in a new language, it isn't a quick sprint, is it?
Not at all. It's much more like a marathon. Setting overly ambitious or unrealistic goals, like expecting to achieve fluency in, say, 3 months.
Yeah, you see those ads sometimes.
Right. That can often lead to feelings of discouragement, maybe even burnout. It's so important to strike a healthy balance between being ambitious in your goals and being patient and understanding with yourself throughout the journey.
So aim high, sure, but also understand and accept that significant progress takes consistent effort and, crucially, time.
Exactly. And the Daily English podcast also touched on the idea of defining what personal fluency actually means to each individual learner. What's the value in doing that? It's about recognizing that fluency isn't some single rigid definition that applies to everyone equally.
Right.
It's not just about having perfect grammar or sounding exactly like a native speaker from London or New York. True fluency, real functional fluency, is really about developing the ability to communicate effectively and confidently in the specific situations that are relevant to your personal goals for learning English.
That makes a lot of sense. My fluency goals might be quite different if I'm primarily learning English for, say, casual travel versus if I need it for complex negotiations at work.
Precisely. Tailor your definition of fluency to your own specific needs and aspirations. And to help you stay motivated along that tailored path, the Daily English podcast really emphasized the importance of consciously focusing on and celebrating those small, incremental wins.
Ah, yes, the small wins again.
They matter. So instead of getting discouraged by how much more you feel you still need to learn,
Which is easy to do.
Very easy. Instead, you should actively acknowledge and celebrate every new word you learn, every sentence you understand, every successful interaction you manage, no matter how small it might seem at the time.
Okay.
These small victories provide crucial positive reinforcement. They fuel your motivation, and they help to steadily build your overall confidence bit by bit. It's about consciously shifting your focus from the perceived deficit to the tangible progress you are making.
Now, language learning, as we know, can definitely have its moments of frustration, challenges. How does our mindset play a role in how we navigate those inevitable difficulties?
That's precisely where resilience comes into play. Mental toughness.
Resilience.
Expect that there will be moments of frustration. Expect that you'll feel stuck sometimes or discouraged. These are normal parts of the learning process for literally everyone.
Okay, it's normal to feel stuck.
Totally normal. The key is not to let those temporary setbacks define your overall journey or derail you completely. It's about developing the mental toughness to bounce back, to learn from the challenges, and crucially, to maintain your forward momentum. Keep going.
So it's about having that mental grit to persevere and keep going even when things feel a bit tough or progress seems annoyingly slow.
That's exactly it. And how can we actively build that kind of resilience?
Yeah.
Well,
uh,
surrounding yourself with a supportive community of fellow learners can be incredibly beneficial. Yeah. Actively connect with other language learners. Find language partners. Join online forums or language learning groups. Sharing your experiences, exchanging encouragement, just realizing that others are facing similar challenges. It can make a huge difference in your ability to stay resilient when things get tough.
It's like having a built-in support system. People who actually get it because they're going through it too.
Exactly. And finally, the Daily English podcast touched on something I thought was really interesting: the power of gratitude in the context of language learning. How does cultivating gratitude fit into this whole picture?
It's a great point. When you consciously practice gratitude, you actively shift your focus away from what you might perceive as lacking or difficult and towards appreciating what you already have and what you have already accomplished.
So focusing on the positives.
Yes,
Yeah.
and in the context of language learning, there is always something to be grateful for. Access to learning resources, maybe, the opportunity to connect with different cultures through the language, even just the progress you've already made, however small it might seem. That's a really positive and frankly refreshing way to look at it. It's about appreciating the entire journey of learning, isn't it? Not just fixating on the final destination of fluency.
Precisely. Approaching language learning with a sense of gratitude fosters enjoyment. It strengthens your intrinsic motivation, that inner drive, and ultimately it helps you to persevere through any challenges you might encounter along the way. It makes the whole process more sustainable.
This has been such an insightful, really comprehensive deep dive into this often tricky leap from understanding English to actually speaking it with real confidence. What's the central takeaway, the main thing you'd like our listener to really remember from our discussion today?
I think the main thing is that the journey to speaking English fluently, it really requires a thoughtful combination of things. You need the practical speaking techniques we discussed, yes. You need a strategic approach to how your brain processes and produces language. And crucially, you need the cultivation of a positive, resilient mindset, one that embraces learning and perseveres through challenges. It's all connected.
A combination approach. And what are the key actions then? The things our listeners should take away and maybe consider implementing in their own language learning journey.
Well, remember that actively speaking English is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with consistent practice, dedicated effort, and maintaining a positive outlook. Critically, don't allow the fear of making mistakes to hold you back or keep you silent.
Don't let fear win.
Exactly. Embrace challenges as valuable opportunities for growth. And make sure, really make sure, to acknowledge and celebrate every step forward you take, no matter how small it may seem in the moment. Celebrate that progress.
Absolutely. And maybe as a final thought for you, our listener, just consider one small, concrete action you could take today, right now even. Perhaps trying that shadowing technique for just 5 minutes. Or maybe spending a few minutes exploring one of those language exchange apps we mentioned.
Just one small step.
Yeah. What feels like the most accessible, the most manageable first step for you right now, based on everything we've explored in our deep dive today?